This is Daf Chof Beis Amud Aleph, which is in the Art Scroll 22a2, the last paragraph. V'hod derava derabi Eloi. In the Gemara itself, it's just halfway down the Amud. The line starts V'hod derava. That's where I'd like to start from today. Just to make a little bit of a recap of what we're discussing and what's going to be pertinent for today is that there was a machlekes. There was a machlekes between Rava and Reb Ilah, whether or not we say that the concern of the first instance in the Mishnah, the first extra stringency, has to do with chatzitza, of the interposition between the vessels and the underneath vessels, or is it a concern for not chatzitza, but because we're making a gezerah from one thing to another? I'm just going to mute everybody so that if you want to ask any questions, just unmute yourself. So the question, according to Reb Ilah, it's an issue of chatzitza. According to Rava, it's an issue of making a gezerah. Maybe somebody's going to come immerse needles in a small bottle that has, or in a big bottle that has a small opening, and that won't be kosher because it has to be keshveferes anoid. It has to be a 2-finger circumference, an opening for it to be a valid immersion. So the Gemara asked yesterday, when we were discussing yesterday, the Gemara asked, well, what's the practical difference between them? What's the practical difference, whether I say the concern is with regards to chatzitza or with regards to a gezerah? So we said the practical difference would be with a certain type of basket or strainer, because those holes are very big. Therefore, with regards to Reb Ilah, who says that the concern is chatzitza, it doesn't make a difference how big the holes are. The bottom of the basket is still going to serve as a chatzitza, and so therefore it's not going to be valid. Whereas when it comes to Rava's view, which was that it is a gezerah because we're concerned about somebody coming to immerse needles in a vessel that doesn't have an opening bigger than we wouldn't have that concern. So now the Gemara comes along and says that, you know what, this is indeed a machlokes that precedes Reb Ilah and Rava. It's actually a machlokes of the Tanaim, right? So Rava and Reb Ilah were Amoraim, and this is a machlokes that existed already in the times of the Tanaim, and that's what we're holding today. So it's 22a2. I just want to say one brief point before we go any further with regards to the differences between Truma, Kodesh, a Chaver, and a Am Haaretz. Back in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, right, there were certain things that Am Haaretzim were not particular about. They were not extremely stringent and careful about. However, that doesn't mean that they were completely insensitive to anything that has to do with sanctity and holiness. There were certain things that they were extra careful about and certain things that they were less careful about. I once heard a vort in the name of the Brisker Rav, and he said, why is it that non-religious Jews take Yom Kippur very seriously, and they don't take Shabbos, let's say, or Kashrus as seriously? So he says the reason is because the religious people take Yom Kippur very seriously, and because we are all one entity, it has a ripple effect. And if we were to take Shabbos as seriously as we took Yom Kippur, then that would have a ripple effect, and the people who are less religious would also take it far more seriously. The same point here would apply with regards to the laws of Tumah Tahara. Tumah Tahara, the things that the Chaverim, the Perushim, were extra careful, had a ripple effect and impacted the Am Haaretzim to know that there's certain things we don't play around with. So when it comes to Kodesh, they were very careful, to the point is that if there would be any irregularity when it comes to Kodesh, they would ask before doing anything. They wouldn't just be careless or indifferent. They would make sure to get everything absolutely right when it comes to Kodesh, because Kodesh was kind of a set apart from everything else, and that helps us to understand the upcoming Gemara that we're going to read, that we're going to learn today, is to understand why it is that we would trust the Am Haaretz. It's true. The Gemara is going to say, and we mentioned this already yesterday, that there's this idea of Ava, right? With the reason why we have to accept, the reason why we have to accept the kalim of the Am Haaretz when it comes to Kodesh is because otherwise they would go and they would make their own bama, they would start making their own paraduma and so on and so forth. But that's not enough, really. There must be more to it, and the additional factor that needs to be taken into consideration is this idea that we do trust them, that when it comes to Kodesh, they're going to be more careful because we show them how serious it is. So now let's learn the Gemara inside. This dispute between Rava and Rabbi Loi is actually a dispute between the Tanoim. Tanya was taught in the Braisa, Sal v'gargusni, when you have a basket or this large strainer, shemilon kelim vitbilon, that you put kalim in and you immerse them, bein lekodesh, bein letruma tahirin, whether it's for the purpose of kodesh, whether it's for the purpose of truma, we consider it to be valid. And that would fit perfectly with Rava, who says that when you have a certain type of basket, it's still going to be good because we don't concern ourselves with regards to the issue of chatzitza. It was only the question of whether the entrance had the size of sheferes anayin. But Abba Shaul says the truma, that they become tar for truma, but not for kodesh. It's not a valid immersion when it comes to kodesh. So now, just one second. So now the Gemara says, if we're going to come along and we're going to say that there's a possibility of kodesh becoming invalid because of a chatzitza, according to Rava, according to Rabbi Law, or we have a real concern about somebody toveling something in a keli which has an opening that is too small, so then l'chayra, these same concerns should be a concern for truma as well. That's what the Gemara asks. If so, truma nami, let us be concerned with these things with regards to truma as well. And for the Gemara, leman kamrinan, to whom are we saying these rules about whether or not you can immerse a keli in another keli, or whether for the purpose of chatzitza or for the purpose of shveferes hanoid? This is for chaverim. And therefore, Chaverim Meida Yodei. The Chaverim are already aware of this information, knowing that it could serve as a chatzitza, or knowing that an opening less than Shveferes Hanoid is not kosher. And so therefore, when it comes to matters of Truma, they will be careful, even when they're using another vessel to immerse their vessels in. Nevertheless, they'll make sure that it's not touching the bottom when they immerse it. Frank the Gemara, if so, kodesh nami. You're telling me that the chaverim already know this and they're going to be careful with truma, so they'll be careful for the very same things with kodesh, and not just they'll be careful, they'll be even more careful because they know that it's kodesh and you have to be very careful. So therefore, why do we make this gezerah specifically for kodesh and not for truma? And for the Gemara, so the Gemara answers, because we're worried that the Am Haaretz is going to see what what the Talmud Chacham is doing when he's immersing his vessel, and then he may go and immerse a vessel that is going to be then used for kodesh, and it's going to be invalid because he's doing the wrong thing. L'chayra, you could ask the question, and this question I had to call somebody else because it was really bothering me. How does the Am Haaretz know that you're immersing your keli for truma and not for kodesh? You understand what I'm asking? L'chayra, you're telling me that we're going to make a difference between truma and kodesh because we're worried about the Am Haaretz coming along and seeing you immerse your keli inside of another keli, and he's not going to be careful for the chatzitza. You're going to be careful for the chatzitza, but he's not going to be careful for the chatzitza. Therefore, we came along and we made a gezerah by kodesh. But what about for truma? In other words, you're saying that both for truma and for kodesh, we're not worried about the chaver. We're only worried about the fact that the Am Haaretz is going to follow your example and immerse his vessel inside of another vessel when it comes to kodesh. But one second. So you're allowing the chaver to immerse his vessel inside of another vessel for truma, and you're telling me that the Am Haaretz who's watching him is not going to come along and say, "Oh, I don't remember what exactly he was toveling it for. He was toveling it for something, and I saw the rabbi. He put one vessel in another vessel. So the fact that I'm toveling it now for kodesh, I could probably also do what the rabbi did, right? Because that's what I saw the rabbi do, and you see this all the time." You know, it says in Maseches Sanhedrin, it says that with regards to giving a psak halacha, it says you cannot give a psak halacha unless you have smicha. Why? Even if you're a Talmud Chacham. Why? So the Gemara over there says because what can happen is people can misunderstand. People can hear something and misunderstand what you're saying. You need to get smicha to ensure that you're clear in your instructions so that nobody can misunderstand what you're saying. Otherwise, there can be a terrible consequence. And the Gemara goes on to relate a whole story over there, how they mixed up the whether it was liquid from eggs or liquid from dirty water and so on and so forth. But the point here is when I see a rabbi doing something, I automatically assume that what the rabbi is doing is okay. And here the Gemara assumes that the Am Haaretz is going to know that the rabbi right now, when he immerses it inside another vessel, that's for truma, and that's allowed, right? But when it comes to the issue of kodesh, then you're not allowed to. How would he know that? So I called up my friend, Rabbi Blumenthal from Lakewood, and I asked him the question. And so he was the one that pointed out to me how he says elsewhere in Maseches Chulin, it explains how there was a whole different atmosphere around anything to do with Kodesh. And there may have even been a declaration, right, required when a person was going to immerse something for Kodesh, which means to say that when they would put something into the mikveh for Kodesh, it was very clear that this was a different type of immersion than if they were doing it for Truma. There was a certain level of awe and reverence around it, so much so that an Am Haaretz, when he's coming to immerse a keli, and he's going to try to do it correctly, he's going to realize that he's never seen a rabbi, a chaver, coming and immersing another keli within another keli for things of kodesh. 1 second. The problem we still have is, what about truma? Well, that we're going to deal with soon. In other words, the chaver knows that he's got to make sure that when he's putting one vessel inside another vessel, to make sure that it doesn't touch the bottom of the inner vessel, whereas the Am Haaretz doesn't know. So we're going to address that in a minute. But anyway, so far what we have is we're concerned by Kodesh that Am Haaretz is going to see a chaver putting his vessel inside of another vessel when he's immersing it, and he's going to come and do the same thing. And that's going to be a problem because he won't be careful for chatzitza, or he won't be careful for immersing a needle in a vessel that is smaller than a shveferes hanoit. Okay, but Frank the Gemara, as I just said, we still have the problem with truma. You allowed the chaver to go and immerse his vessel inside of another vessel for truma. What about the amoretz? He's going to see him and he's going to come along and copy him and do the same thing and not be careful for the chatzitza, or not be careful to make sure that the opening is bigger than shviferes hanoid. And for the Gemara, we're not concerned about that. Why? Because we're not going to accept the truma from the amoretz. And so therefore, the fact that he's going to copy you and he's going to do the same thing as you when it comes to truma, we're not concerned, because we're never going to accept the truma from the amoretz, because we assume that it's going to be tamei. So therefore, there's no concern that the chaver's immersion of the vessel with regards to truma will result in a kohen receiving truma that has become possible by this amoretz. Frag the Gemara, if that's the case, why can't we say the same rule that we shouldn't accept kodesh from the amoretz, and therefore, if we're not going to accept kodesh from the amoretz, so then let the chaver come along and immerse his keli inside of another keli, even for kodesh. He'll be careful. And for the Gemara, we cannot do that. Havalei Eva, because we're going to have a problem of animosity between the amoretz and the chaverim. Why? Because if we're not going to accept his kodesh, he's going to take offense. And it's going to cause tremendous animosity between them and the chaverim and the koyanim. So, like the Gemara, Truma nami havaleva. You're telling me, don't worry about truma. We're not going to accept it from him. When I ask you about kodesh, you say no, it's eva. I ask you, what about truma? You also have the problem of eva. You also have the problem that if you don't accept his truma, there's gonna be animosity. And for the Gemara, the truth is, it's not going to concern him. It's not going to bother this amoretz so much, because the ozel yoav le'lekoyin amoretz chavre. He is going to take his truma. If you reject it, he'll take it to another kohen that's a friend of his, that's an amoretz, that's not particular about these concerns, and therefore he won't feel completely left outside, not being able to give his truma as he's required to do. Right, the Gemara. 1 second. You said that we need to be concerned about Eva. Oman Tanid the Chaysh Eva. Who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Right, that's concerned for the possibility of Eva, of this animosity between the amoretz and the chaverim. And for the Gemara, Rabbi Yasi, it's Rabbi Yasi. The Tanya, because we learned elsewhere in the Brisa that Amar Rabbi Yasi says, why do we believe concerning truma, the tara of wine and oil for kodesh a whole year round? Right? In other words, in our Mishnah that we have over here, we mentioned 11 stringencies of kodesh over truma, which means to say that we will allow certain leniences with regards to truma, but we will be more strict with regards to kodesh. But later on in the Gemara, right, we're going to see that in the Mishnah, few daf on, we're going to see that there are certain cases that we are more lenient by kodesh and more stringent by truma. And this is one of the cases where we say that everybody, even the amoretz, is trusted with regards to wine and oil for kodesh. And we say that that's not true with truma. So the question is, why? So the answer given by the answer is so that we don't have all the amoratzim going, each person on their own, and build a bama, an altar for himself, which was forbidden. And then burn a paraduma for himself, basically saying, listen, you guys don't accept me, so therefore I'm going to go and do it all on my own. Amar of Papa, Papa said, "Kaman mikablinon ha'idnas adusam amaretz." In accordance with whom do we today accept testimony from an amaretz? In other words, why should we accept testimony of an am haaretz? Perhaps we shouldn't. So he's asking, the fact is that we do. We do accept the testimony of an am haaretz. So why? According to who is this? Kaman, in accordance with whom? Rabbi Yasi. It goes in accordance with Rabbi Yasi, who is worried about this issue of this animosity. Now that we're saying that, and we have explained the reason why we are extra stringent with regards to Kodesh is because we don't want the Am Ha'aretz to learn from the Chaver and then come to make a mistake, because we have already established that we are going to accept things that he brings, right? So the next concern we have is we should be worried even for Truma. Why? Because at the end of the day, we still borrow things from an Am Ha'aretz, as he's going to bring a Mishnah to show that we do borrow things from an Am Ha'aretz, and so therefore maybe we should be concerned with regards to immersing your vessel into a mikveh, even for Truma. When you're putting it into another vessel, you should still be concerned. Why? Because maybe the Am Ha'aretz will do exactly like you did with regards to Truma, and don't say that we're not going to be Makabel the Truma, so therefore it's fine. We're going to borrow his vessel, and if he didn't do a good immersion, we've got a problem, because I'm going to use that vessel that I borrow from him. Understand the question? Let's do it inside. Let us be concerned for the possibility of a chaver borrowing the vessel of an Am Ha'aretz for the use of Truma, which he toiveled, following your example, but not being careful to make sure that the inner vessel didn't have a chatzitza by pressing down on the outer vessel. How do we know that people borrow vessels from a Am Ha'aretz? So we're going to bring a Mishnah with a long discussion that comes along with it, but just remember, bear in mind, the purpose of bringing this Mishnah is to show that we do borrow vessels from Am Ha'aretz. The Tanan, as taught in a Mishnah, Kli Cheres Matzil Ala Koil. There's a law in the Torah. It's the law of Tzomit Posil. It's the law of the Kli Cheres. The Kli Cheres is a fascinating law unto itself with regards to Tumah Tahara. We know, we mentioned this yesterday already, right, that when it comes to an earthenware vessel, on the one hand, we say an earthenware vessel has no takana. Once it becomes tamei, the only way to deal with it is you have to smash it, right? You cannot immerse it in a mikvah. But on the other hand, we say there's something unique about it in that it does not contract tuma from the outside. In other words, if something tamei touches a vessel on the outside, that earthenware vessel does not become tamei. The only way it becomes tamei is from the inside, from the hollow on the inside. That's how it becomes tamei. Now, we're told about that particular earthenware vessel that if it is closed tight, then it protects everything that's inside of it from becoming tamei. All right. Now, obviously, we're talking about when this earthenware vessel is when this earthenware vessel is itself tahor, right? So now let's do the Mishnah. So one more thing, very important, because it's going to be written again to this Mishnah and the examples that it brings. There's the idea of where you have a corpse inside of a house and it's on the lower floor and there's a skylight between the lower floor and the higher floor. And so therefore the tumah, the impurity, can spread upwards to the second floor. If you fill that hole tightly with this earthenware vessel, then we say that the earthenware vessel can make a stop to the tumah spreading further and save everything on the top floor. Now, there's going to be a difference between the view of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai in this case. Let's do it. Now, we've learned in the Mishnah, an earthenware vessel protects all substances from becoming tamei. Divrei Beis Hillel. This is the view of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says, it doesn't protect Ella only al oichlim al mashkim al klei cheres. It's only when it comes to food and liquids and the earthen and the earthenware vessels, those things, this particular earthenware vessel that you put in the skylight will protect. However, when it comes to anything else, meaning when it comes to vessels that are not earthenware, then it doesn't protect it from becoming tamei. Okay. Amru lahem Beis Hillel leBeis Shammai. Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, mipnei ma. Why do you make this difference and say that it doesn't protect the non-earthenware vessels from becoming tamei? Amru Beis Shammai says, it's very simple. I'll tell you why. Mipnei shu tamei al gabe am ha'aretz. Because this earthenware vessel, right, is going to be tamei on account of an am ha'aretz. Ve'ein kli tamei chaytzitz. And the law is that a vessel that is tamei, if it itself is tamei, it cannot serve as the chatzitza and interpose between the corpse and the things above, which are tar. You can't protect it. Amal hem Beis Hillel responds back to Beis Shammai that what you're saying is illogical because it's self-contradictory. But you said that the food and the drink, they right, and also the earthenware, right, are what? Are tahar. So therefore, how can you tell me that the reason why the non-earthenware vessels are tamei is because it's a kli of an am ha'aretz, and therefore it's tamei, and therefore it doesn't work? When you came along and said that the food and the liquids and the earthenware vessels are protected and do not become tamei. Amru lehem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai answered them and said, when we came and said that the food and the liquid within it are tahar, what do we mean? Here we go over to Daf Chof Beis Amud Beis. We said that only for the am ha'aretz it is going to be tahar. Aval the tyrus akli. If I come along and I declare that the non-earthenware vessel is also going to be tahar, then shetarasai lecha v'loi. This vessel, non-earthenware vessel, is if we say that it's tar, it's going to be tar not just for him, but also for you, for the chaver, which shows us, this Mishnah shows us that we are concerned about you borrowing a vessel from an am ha'aretz, right? So what have we said? We've said like this: Beis Shammai is trying to explain why there's a difference between the food and the drink and the earthenware vessels, which we say to the am ha'aretz that it is tahar, and what we mean is tahar for himself. Why? Because food and liquid and earthenware vessels, me, the chaver, I'm not going to borrow from this am ha'aretz. However, the non-earthenware vessel, right, where one can immerse it into the mikvah, I will borrow from the am ha'aretz. Now, with regards to this view of Beis Shammai, where he makes a distinction between the food and the drink and the non-earthenware vessel, right, comes along Rabbi Yeshua, and he says very sharp words. Tanya, it was taught in the Brisa. Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm ashamed of your words, Beis Shammai. Wow. Efsha, could it be possible Isha Losha Ba'areva, that a woman who's on the second floor, right, when you have the corpse on the bottom floor. So she's there on the second floor, and she's busy kneading the dough in this bowl, right? That she's mixing the dough in. Now, all of a sudden, the guy dies downstairs, right? The guy downstairs dies. So the woman is told, stop what you're doing. She stops what she's doing. And what's the result of everything? We've put this vessel in between the skylight, right? In that skylight. And we're saying, what's happened is now Isha Vareva, when it comes to the woman and the metal bowl that she has or the wooden bowl that she has in which she's mixing everything, Tamei Shiva, they're going to be Tamei Shiva because they came into contact, because they were in the same house as this corpse. And we said that the vessel that was put in the skylight doesn't work, doesn't save them. However, obatzik tahar, but the dough, that's going to be tahar. Why? Because Beis Shammai came along and said that the food is tahar. How does that even make sense? How could you have that distinction? Furthermore, let's take it not with a woman and the dough, but the lugin molim mashkin. If you're going to have a case of a flask, which is metal, right, which is full of beverages, right, that is on the top floor. So what's going to happen? We're going to say lugin tomei shiva. You're going to have the flask being tomei. Right? Or mashkin tarin, but the beverage that's inside the flask, that's going to be tar. How's that going to work, right? It doesn't sound logical to come along and say that the outside glass, the outside vessel is tamei because it's metal, but the liquids inside of it are going to be tar. So what happened? The story goes like this. Very, very important lesson for life. So one of the disciples of Beis Shammai came along and he started to engage in a discussion with Rabbi Yeshua Amaloi, and he said to him, I will explain to you the reasoning of Beis Shammai. Amaloi, he said to him, Emar, say. Yeshua told him, no, speak. Amaloi, he says like this, starting with a question. Kli tamei chaytzetz or einei chaytzetz? If you have a kli that is tamei, does it interpose as a chatzitza or not? Amar loy einei chaytzetz. Rabbi Yeshua says to him, the halacha is it doesn't serve as a chatzitza. So now, let me ask you a question. Kli shel amoretz tamei or tar? When you talk about a vessel of an amoretz, is it tamei or is it tar? Amar loy tamei. He says it's tamei. Now, he asks, if you're going to go and tell the Amoretz that your earthenware vessel is tamei, is he going to listen to you? Certainly not. What are you going to tell him? All your earthenware vessels, all your china at home, it's all tamei. What's he going to do? Throw them in the garbage? The Amoretz is not going to listen to you. Why is he not going to listen to you? Because there's no way to salvage it. And the same thing is going to be also with regards to the food, the perishables. What are you going to tell them? You got to chuck out all your food because there's no way to purify the fruit. And not only that, if you are going to tell him that he's tamei, you know what he's going to tell you? He's going to respond to you. You only tell me my stuff is tamei. Your stuff is tamei, right? This is the reason why Beis Shammai made a distinction between the klicheres, the food and the liquid of the Amoretz, and the kalim that are that you could immerse and make a distinction between the ruling. Why? Because like this, I want the Am Haaretz to not have this antagonistic view towards the Talmidei Chachamim. If we keep telling them no, then they're never going to listen to us, even in a case where things are salvageable. So when it comes to klicheres, It's not salvageable. And when it comes to food and drink, it's not salvageable. So I'll just tell them it's tar, because even if I tell them it's tame, they're not going to listen to me. And if I tell them that and they're not going to listen to me, right, with regards to these things, then when there's something where I do want them to listen to me because they can listen to me, like, for example, the non-earthenware vessels, right? Then they won't listen to me either. So now I come along, Beis Shammai says, and I tell them, the food you can eat, the kalim, the earthenware kalim, they're fine, and so on and so forth. The only thing that's not okay is your non-earthenware vessels. Then what's going to happen is the Amoritz will turn around, and the Amoritz will say, okay, fine, so tell me what I need to do with my non-earthenware kalim, and for that I'll tell them to go, and I'll tell him to immerse it into I'll tell him to immerse it in a mikvah, and it'll be fine. When Rabbi Yeshua heard this, miyad holach Rabbi Yeshua immediately went, when ishtateach al kivrei Beis Shammai, prostrated himself on the graves of the students of Shammai. Omar, he said, Nanesi lachem atzmis Beis Shammai. He said, I've spoken excessively against you, bones of Beis Shammai. And then he went on to say, if your cryptic rulings are so incredibly brilliant and logical, how much more so the ones whose reasoning is readily explained are they true? Amru, they said with regards to Rabbi Yeshua, as a result of this incident, he went and he fasted. And they said about Rabbi Yeshua, called Yomov Hushru Shinov Beitan Yosef. Rabbi Yeshua's remaining days, his teeth were blackened because of this many fasts that he undertook for having spoken negatively about the sages of Beis Shammai. All right, now that we've said all that, bottom line, Tani Mihos Lecha V'loi. Ultimately, we see from this Mishnah that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, right, they both agree that with regards to the kalim of the Amoritz, it's going to be used by him and by you. So there's this idea of borrowing. So therefore, Alma Shalina Minayu. So we see from this that what? That people do borrow kalim from an Amoritz. And if that's the case, ultimately our question is, why do we make a difference between Kodesh and Truma with regards to immersing one vessel inside of another vessel? Because if we're going to take a vessel from the Amoritz and use it ourselves, right? So shouldn't we be extra careful not to immerse one vessel inside of another vessel so that the Amoritz doesn't come to do the same thing and then land us in trouble? And for the Gemara, it's not a problem. Why? When I'm going to borrow this vessel from the Amoritz, I'm going to immerse it in the mikveh myself. So I don't care whether he necessarily puts a vessel inside of another vessel and is not careful to make sure there's no chatzitza, because when I take it from him, I'm going to run to the mikveh, dip it in the mikveh, and everything's going to be fine. Frank the Gemara. If so, all right. Then Beis Hillel should have turned back and replied to Beis Shammai that when we borrow the vessels from them, then we immerse those vessels ourselves. In other words, we just gave a long explanation explaining Beis Shammai's stringency. Oh, excuse me, it's not even a stringency. In a way, it's a leniency, right? By saying that these things are going to be tahar, because we're not going to eat them anyway. And these things we're going to come along and tell them they're tamei because we want the Amoritz to go and table it because we're going to borrow it from him. So why didn't Beis Hillel turn around to Beis Shammai and say, your whole distinction makes no sense? Why? Because at the end of the day, what do I care whether he immerses the vessels that can be immersed into the mikvah before I borrow them? I can just borrow them, and when I borrow them, I'll put them in the mikvah myself. Yes.
When we started this entire discussion, I mean, it came to me that if the chaver is in fact going to be allowed to borrow, and why doesn't he just go and tovel the darn thing himself so that he's happy with the tahara of the thing itself? I mean, so here, this is basically what comes out of it at a half a daf
Right.
after all of this thing. So I was surprised that wasn't said, when this was initially discussed at the very end of the last page.
Well, so the reason is because we still hadn't yet established that we borrow from an Amoritz. So we brought this whole story about Beis Shammai to show that we do borrow. And this is from a Mishnah in Idios that we do borrow. So we had to go through the whole Mishnah to come to establish the fact that we do borrow from them. Because until then, one could say, who says you're allowed to borrow from an Amoritz? So we brought this whole Mishnah and this whole discussion to show, yes, we do. That's the Ketani Mihas L'chavaloi. That's like that's what we get out of the whole story is we brought the whole story to establish the fact that we do borrow from them, right? Okay. So that's why once we've established to say that it's an established fact that we do borrow from them, straight away we go to your answer that, well, okay, well then we'll just table it ourselves. So we're left with the question, ultimately, why could Beis Hillel turn to Beis Shammai and say exactly that? Let's just table it ourselves, right? And we don't have to worry about them. And for the Gemara, Tmei Meis Boi Hazor Shlishi Ushvi. Here's the thing. When it comes to a Tmei Meis, right, where something becomes Tomei because of coming into contact with the Tmei Meis, in order to make that tahor, you cannot just put it into the mikvah. You need to have the afer of the meichatos of the paraduma, and it has to be sprinkled on the third day and on the seventh day. Now, generally speaking, people don't borrow vessels for such a long period of time, which means to say like this. If I'm going to come over to you and say, listen, I'm having a bar mitzvah Shabbos, I want to borrow your big soup pot, right? And you say, here you go, right? If I'm worried that there could have been a contracting of tumas meis, right? Then I can't just run to the mikveh erev Shabbos and put it into the mikveh and then use it for Shabbos. There's a whole process, and usually when I'm borrowing something, I don't borrow it for such a long, extended period of time to be able to do the first hazayah on the third day and the second one on the seventh day. And so, therefore, what the Gemara is saying is the whole discussion with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, right, about borrowing the vessels of an Amoritz is taking the most extreme case where we want to even be able to borrow a vessel that has come into contact with a Tomei Mes. For now, Frank the Gemara, 1 second. So you're telling me that Beis Shammai is telling you that the reason why he went to make this distinction is to be able to borrow a vessel from an Amoritz, even though it may have contracted tumas mes, the most severe tumah, right? The Gemara, va'atvila mehemne. Seemingly, 1 second. Oh, 1 second. So let me finish the answer. So the answer is the answer is 1 second. One second. So the reason why Beis Hillel didn't answer the Beis Shammai, that I'm just going to go and table it, is because they both understood that they're talking about Tmei Mes, and so therefore that's not a possibility for you to just come along and do things without the Amoritz, and so therefore we have this whole extra stringency with regards. We have this whole extra stringency with regards to not immersing one vessel into another vessel. Let's go a little bit further. I just have a question, but hopefully it's all going to come resolved in a minute. So, Frank the Gemara, and is it so that an Amoritz are not believed with regards to immersion? 1 second. Did we say that? 1 second. Okay, so I'm sorry. Let's go back for a second. I'm sorry. Let's go back for a second. We answered, right, that we borrow from an Amoritz. So the Gemara says, since we borrow from the Amoritz, why are you not worried about an Am Ha'aretz, right? Copying you and immersing it one vessel inside of another vessel. So we said, because when we borrow it, we're going to immerse it into a mikvah ourselves. That seems to be a clear indictment of the Amoritz, saying that we don't trust him with regards to immersing his things into the mikvah. You understand? Sorry, it took me a minute to put it all together.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm sorry I don't want to disrupt your concentration here, but it seems like Beit Hillel is more stringent than Beit Shammai is in some ways.
No, he's actually more lenient because, well, we'll see. Ultimately, yes, you're correct. Ultimately, Beit Shammai is going to be more lenient because when we are strict with the Am Ha'aretz in one circumstance, it's going to make it possible for us to believe him in another circumstance, as it's going to come out in a minute. But before we get to that, let's just get the flow of the Gemara going straight over here. So the question we asked is, why does the Mishnah tell us that when it comes to Truma, we're not worried about the Am Ha'aretz copying you? And we've established is because ultimately when we borrow a vessel, we don't trust the Am Ha'aretz and we're going to tovel it ourselves. So ultimately what's come out of this is that we don't trust the Am Ha'aretz. So the Gemara is asking, do we not trust Am Ha'aretz with regards to immersion? Right? Didn't we learn in the Brisa that Monim Am Ha'aretz Altaras Tvilas Tmei Mes? We learned in the Brisa that an Am Ha'aretz is believed with respect to Tahara by immersion of that which came into contact with a corpse and becomes Tmei Mes. So l'chayra, how do you resolve the conflict between our Mishnah, which says that you need to be careful, you don't need to be careful with Truma, right? Because ultimately we've established that we don't trust the Am Ha'aretz, and we're going to tovel it again with this brisa that we mentioned over here, that says that we do trust the Am Ha'aretz with regards to immersing things when it comes to a corpse. Abaya says Likasha, there's no difficulty between these two seemingly different Mishnah and Brisa, because Ha Begufa, the Brisa that says that we trust the Am Ha'aretz is talking about his body, that we believe that he went into the mikvah. Ha Bekela, but with regards to Truma, when we say that we're not concerned about whether the Am Ha'aretz will copy you because we don't trust him anyway, and therefore we're going to immerse his kalim into the mikvah ourselves, that's with regards to his kalim. So there's a difference between the kalim and the guf. Okay. Another answer why these two things are not a contradiction, the Mishnah and our Mishnah and that Brisa, is Rava says, Aidi v'Aidi b'Kelim, that both are talking about Kalim, but lo kasha, and it's not a kasha. Why? In the case where we say he is believed, it's the Omar, he said, Ma'olam lo hitbalti kli b'toich. He came along and he said, I've never immersed a vessel with inside of another vessel. It's never happened. And over here, where we say that we don't believe him, like in the case of the Truma, and therefore we're going to tell himself, it's the Oma Hitbalti. I immersed it. I put it into a keli, but not into a keli that has an opening less than the 2 fingers that we mentioned is needed before. So now what we're going to say is, because he's an Amaretz, we don't believe that he's so well versed to be able to know and to be careful with regards to that. So if he says, I never immersed it in one vessel inside of a vessel, so he doesn't get into the whole question of whether it's a chatzitza or whether it's whether the opening was one hole bigger than the other. He doesn't get into all those questions because he says, I just immersed it plainly as it is. So therefore we believe him. But here, in our Mishnah, where we say we don't believe him, it's talking about where he said, I toiveled it, a keli inside of a keli, but I was careful not to have a kli that has an opening less than a sheferes hanoid. Well, Tanya, it was shortly taught in the Brisa, Nem and Am ha'oretz, lema peirus lehuksharu, and Am ha'oretz is believed to say that the fruits have not been prepared to become susceptible to receive Tumah, but he not believed to say that they were indeed prepared to become susceptible, but they didn't actually contract Tumah. We make that distinction to say if it never entered into becoming a possible problem, right? Let's say, for example, if he testifies that he was never machsherit to become Tamei, then we accept his testimony. But if he says I was machsherit to become Tamei, but I made sure that it didn't become Tamei, then we don't accept it. Okay, so far so good. We haven't finished yet. So the Gemara says above, right, that an Am ha'oretz is believed to say that he immersed his own body properly. Frag the Gemara, va'agufa mi behemen. But do we indeed believe him concerning the tahara of his own body? V'hatanya, there was a taught in the Brisa, if a chaver comes to receive
but
his
Rabbi, I'm sorry to stop you, but the last claim that if he claimed that he did immerse it, we don't believe him. But if he says he didn't immerse it, we believe him. That excludes the ones that really did immerse it correctly. Maybe some of them do, the Amaretz.
We're saying like this. We need to establish principles by which we can determine things for the whole population. We cannot start making a distinction between one person and another person, right? So therefore, if you're a chaver, then we know that you are generally established to being careful when it comes to these procedures. If you're an Am ha'aretz, then you are generally established to not being careful when it comes to these procedures. And so therefore, we need to be able to have principles by which we apply them and determine whether something can be accepted or not. So if you're coming along and you're bringing truma to a kohen, right? And you're saying that this truma, for example, right, never is mukhshar to be Mekabel Tumah, then I'll accept it from you. But if you say it was Mukhshar to be Mekabel Tumah, and it wasn't Mekabel Tumah because I was careful with it, we say I can't accept it because you're not generally established to being careful about these things, and because this is not your general habit and general practice, it could be that it did become Tumah without you realizing. Likewise.
So we know for certain. We know for certain that he's not doing it right.
It's not that we know for certain, but we apply our principle of how we view your vessels. So when you come along and say that you immersed a vessel into a mikvah straight itself, I accept that you did it correctly and properly. If you tell me that I put the vessel inside another vessel, but I made sure that it was done properly, then I say I don't accept that.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Now, we're coming along and we're saying like this, that what somebody, a Amahoretz who says that I immerse myself properly, that we say that we trust you and that we know that you are tahor properly. How does that make sense with the following brisa that was taught as follows? It says, when a chaver comes to get the sprinkling of the mechatos from the parah aduma, right? We say you put it on the 3rd day and the 7th day, which means to say like this: the 1st day of your tumah, right? You have to wait and you start the count 1, 2, and on the 3rd day you come and you say, hello, Bruchim Habayim, Shalom Aleichem, I'm here, please sprinkle me with the mechatos. So we say for a chaver, we sprinkle it up upon him as soon as he comes and asks for it. But Am Haaretz, if Am Haaretz comes along, he says, please sprinkle me with the parah aduma, I need to become tar, a mazin olav ad sheyaseh befonenu shlishi v'shvi. We do not sprinkle upon him until he observes in our presence the 3rd and the 7th day, which means to say, you got here today, so this is day 1 for you. And we wait and we watch you day 2. And on day 3, we'll sprinkle you. And you stay here. And then 4 and 5 and 6 and day 7, we sprinkle you. Then is only when we trust you that you're tahor. So we're saying like this: if you're saying that an Amaretz is not believed before you sprinkle the 3rd day, the sprinkle on him the mechatas, right? That he's waited 3 days. So why do you believe him when he says that I'm tar, that I immersed myself properly? Elam Abaya says, fakert. That's exactly why we trust him. Because of the chumrah, the severity, the stringency with which you dealt with him in the beginning by not believing him for the first 3 days, you've made it easier for him in the end, because now we know that he doesn't want to mess up and have to go through this whole process all over again, realizing that we're so strict with him, he's going to make sure to do it properly the first time around, right? And so therefore, when he comes along and he says, I'm tar, we can believe him because we were stringent with him to begin with. So what do we get from what comes out of all of this? Comes out of all of this is that with regards to tumas mes, right? We say that we do trust this person with regards to his immersion because we are strict with him. How does that leave us with everything we've said until now? Basically, it's like this: when it comes to an Am Haaretz, we do not trust him with regards to truma, with things of truma, and therefore, when he comes along and he gives us a vessel, we'll take it and we'll immerse it into the mikveh for ourselves, right? However, if he came along and he says that I never put it into another basket at all, then we say that we do trust him. We do trust him, and that's why in our Mishnah, when we started out and we said that there's a special maila, a special stringency with regards to kodesh over truma, and that is you're not allowed to immerse one basket within another basket. This was only with regards to kodesh, but not with regards to truma, because with regards to truma, we're going to table it in a basket ourselves. Yes.
Reb,
basket. I'm sorry.
I didn't understand the last part about what Abaya said.
Okay. So what Abaya is saying is like this: you're asking me a question. How is it that we established a minute ago, right, and said that when it comes to Tamei Mes, we trust an Am Haaretz, when here in this brisa that we're mentioning right now, it says that when the Am Haaretz comes along and says, sprinkle me, we say no. We're going to wait 3 days that you stand here in front of us, if we don't even believe him for the counting of the 3 days, right? And we say you have to do it in front of us. Why do we automatically assume that we should trust him with regards to him showing up and saying, I am Tahar from Tamei Mes? So he's answering, he's saying, because we show him how stringent it is by making him go through this whole extra waiting, right? Ultimately, when he goes through the process, we know that he's done it properly. Does that make sense? Or not?
I would think that by you saying what you're saying, you may turn him off.
What do you mean?
Basically, when he says, "Sprinkle me," I'm tahar, and you say, "No, it's not good enough. You have to do it again." I would say, just like we said before, where you showed that you don't trust them, so you might turn around and say, "Okay, well, if you don't trust me, I'll go and do my things my way. I'll go and get my paraduma my way. I'll do everything according my way, and I don't need you because you show no trust in me." I would have a problem in that situation. I would have assumed that if Abaye is saying whatever he's saying, he might say, "Okay, stay here for another 3 days, Tovel, just like you would between the third and seventh day. And at the seventh day, at that time, I will do the Hazayah because I've seen you do it the second time. And therefore you are I accept your Tahara in preparation for the Hazayah to be done."
I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're saying, because Abaye is trying to reconcile the statement that we made before, that an Am Haaretz is believed to claim that his body is tar from Tamei Mes, and how do you reconcile that with the brisa over here that says that if a person comes along, shows up and says, "Please sprinkle me for my first sprinkling on the 3rd day that I'm required to get," right? Because I'm required to get to be sprinkled on the 3rd day. On the 7th day, we say, "No, we're not going to give you the first sprinkling yet. We're going to wait 3 days until we know that this is actually your 3rd day." So we're saying, if you're not going to,
so he has to be sprinkled both days, not just the 7th day.
No. Eat both a chaver and the Am Haaretz. Everybody, the Torah says, when it comes to Tamei Mes, you get sprinkled twice, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. The question is, right? How do we know that that today is actually your 3rd day? You're saying today is your 3rd day, but how do we know that? You're telling me that you were particular and careful to count, and you know that today is your 3rd day. We want to make extra sure that it actually is your 3rd day. So let's start counting from now. 1, 2, 3. Then we sprinkle you. 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we sprinkle you again. When it comes to the chaver, as soon as he shows up.
That was my mistake. I always thought that you had to do Tevilah the 3rd and the 7th day. And on the 7th day, they do the Hazayah. And that's it.
No. There's 2 hazayas. There's a hazaya on the 3rd day, and there's a hazaya on the 7th day.
Fine. Okay.
Rabbi,
Right. Yes.
can I ask in addition?
Of course.
So the guy agreed and went to the second procedure
Yeah.
and got the Hazayah on the 7th day.
Yeah.
A month later, 2 months later, somebody else passes away. He comes back.
Yeah.
Is he going to do it once or twice?
He's got to do
He
it.
continues doing it.
Because now he
every time.
knows. Now he knows.
Well, what he'll do is he'll come and he'll say, one of my kids just came back from Toronto, right? They arrived back last night. They were the last one onto the plane. What happened? There was a really, really long line getting to border control, customs, and security, etc., etc. You have to come earlier. It's as simple as that. You just have to come earlier. The same thing is with the Am Haaretz. He now knows I have to start counting day 1 in front of the Kohanim. That's the way it works. You've got to come earlier. And if I come earlier, my day one starts as soon as I get there. That's when day one starts. And it doesn't matter how many times I come back, because I am an Am Ha'aretz. That is what the procedure is, to ensure that every Am Ha'aretz does it properly, so that they
Okay,
can.
okay, so he has to do it in front of the Kohen.
That's correct. He has to start counting in front of the Kohen from day one. That doesn't mean that a Am Ha'aretz has to stay a Am Ha'aretz. A Am Ha'aretz can become a Chaver. He can sit, study, and be more careful in his practice. But if you are an Am Ha'aretz, then this is the way we do it, so that ultimately, when you come along and you tell me, I am now Tahor from Memes, I believe you. Why do I believe you? Because I know that you've done it properly, because you were under strict supervision of the people who are doing the Hazaya. All right, everybody, I wish you all a wonderful day, and we'll see you.
Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
One quick question.
Yes.
First of all, it's very nice to see you all. That's all. If you're a Talmud, how do they know you're a Talmud Chacham?
I think it's going to be established. The community knows.
Oh, so that's all it is. If you do whatever you do so that the community knows you're a Talmud Chacham, they come with you to the Kayan?
It's assumed that it's either established, or perhaps, I don't know this for a fact, I can look it up, but perhaps there were a couple of questions that they could ask to ascertain whether you knew what you're talking about or not.
Or otherwise, and if not, you just got to go start counting from that day.
That's correct.
Fine, right, okay, fine, I understand. Shkayach, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, all the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.